Welcome to the TryPod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn, represented as always by BetBank to break down round 24 of the NRL. And I'm off a 1-3 losing best bet round. And it was, I guess, about time that was going to happen. And I didn't think any of the tips were too bad. Of course, we'll cover them all. We get great closing line value in all of the tips. I mean, I'll cop the Titans tip against North Queensland as a bad read. Big bounce back by the Cows, but we get plus 4.5. They closed a 2.5 point underdog. Took New Zealand. They went from a 5.5 point dog into 3.5. We had Souths at minus 7.5. They were as much as 10.5 on Saturday and led 28-0 before losing. So that was a very close loss to rub it in after getting New Zealand right, but obviously Titans wrong. And then we lose the Raiders game they lose by 6 in the end, a very tight game. We had Pickham and they closed a 3.5 point favorite. And that's why we say you can't eat closing line value. Long term, that's going to be pretty predictive of successful plays, but out of 4, it's not going to count for a great deal, unfortunately. But what I will say about the Raiders, it should have been 26 all. I made a massive effort to come up with that tip, and one player made a decision that cost me. And of course, if anyone's not picking up the satire there, that's a shout out to Ricky Stewart. And I'll give you a spoiler that Horsburgh is not named in the Raiders side this weekend, but more on the Raiders in a minute. We did win the mixed matchup. So we had the Raiders to actually outscore the Panthers. So we can't say they did nothing for us because we still got, 24 out of the Raiders, and Penrith gave New Zealand a scare late, but only finished with 12. And then the same gamer was also involving the Raiders game, and I had Strange for a try. Do you want me to tell you that I was tossing up between Strange and Sasangi off the BetBank tips platform? And then I chose Strange. Sasangi didn't just score once, he scored twice. And, those close losses that we've copped, especially in recent weeks with the same gamer, multiple chances to hit at 6s or 7s, they hurt at the time, and they hurt even more when the losses pile up. I mean, I'm on a drought with the same gamers, and now after such a good start the first half of the year, we're only 1 unit in profit on the same gamers on their own. And that's where, just one more game going our way. Even I think just a week ago, we had Cronulla, and they just needed one more try, just couldn't cross the line, even though they were blowing out the Bunnies. That would have gone a long way. So that is hurting me and irritating me a bit at the moment. But what really was pleasing for myself was to attend the Battle of Brisbane. And that's one of the greatest games I've been to live. Of course, I'm going to talk about all the matches, and I'll get to this one in detail. But that incredible Finns comeback at Suncorp. I've never been a big guy to sort of get out to the games each and every week, even when I lived in Brisbane. I love the atmosphere and love getting to a big game here or there, but I also love my home environment and ability to just watch it on my TV and hear the commentary and just be, cozy and watch game after game. And now I live in Sunshine Coast with a lot more family commitments too, so it's rare I get to a game. So to get to that one, over 50,000 people, was phenomenal, honestly. Before I get to best bets, I feel like this is going to be a massive show with so much to talk about. That's actually come out around 23, and we're going to do that momentarily. But with Penrith losing and Yo now in doubt for the rest of the season, I feel like if you didn't see New Zealand as a fully fledged contender, you do now. Also, Manly and Canberra, they still had final hopes before last week. Now it really feels like there's only 9 teams in the finals hunt, and we all know 9 doesn't fit into 8. But my question to you, if you support one of the 8 teams that definitely can't win it this year, or even if your side is still in the hunt, if I was to tell you, of course, your team can't win it, because I know that would be your first choice, who do you want to win the comp other than your team, or if your team's out of it? Just tell me in the comments, who would you go for as like your second team, or is there anyone else you'd be really happy to see win it? I think there's an obvious answer, and I'll share mine in a moment. But I got to get to best bets. We're inside the first 5 minutes. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 best bets to share with you. So let's get into it. Starting with one of the blockbusters of the round, first versus second. And I'm going to take the Roosters plus half a try at $1.80 on 365. I think it's wrong team favored there. I actually think the Roosters can win over Penrith. I'm expecting Edwards is back, even though he's not named. But Teddy is definitely back for the Chooks. I just think this game's more meaningful to the Tricolours, and of course the loss of Yo and just the physicality and travel that Penrith endured last week, as well as still having a couple of other good players sidelined. Several reasons why I like the Sydney Roosters. Then I'm going the Sharks on Saturday, minus 8.5 at $1.80, the alt line on 365 against the Raiders. It's also minus 9.5 at $1.80 alt line on Betr, which is fine. Minus 10.5 is probably fine, but of course, my best bet, I'll get under that key number at 10. It's all about the spot. Sharks at home, often embarrassing loss. Raiders have just had their hearts ripped out and their season is over. And now one of their best players, Sasangi, is being rested, which also shows the intentions. So while on paper it looks like the Raiders could stick with this one, it's just all about the spot that I think the Sharks, who still need to claw to secure top 4, which is all important, will respond here. Then I'm going Cowboys Saturday night against Para. So they're on the road, North Queensland. I'm going to lay minus 4.5. It's $1.90 or 91 on Betr and 365. But it's also minus 5.5 everywhere else. And that's perfectly best bet worthy, really, wherever you play it. But of course, I'll take the best number of the 4.5. And it is worth mentioning, last time Para and North Queensland won, it was actually decided by a peculiar score or a margin of 3. Then I'm going New Zealand Warriors minus 6.5 at $1.92 on Dabble against Brisbane. I'll call it a home game later. It's at Suncorp, but if you've been to see the Warriors play at Suncorp, you know what I mean. Or if you've been to Magic Round, in fact, we already did see the Warriors play the Broncos at Suncorp. I don't know if this game will be all that different. I think Brisbane are dead. I think Brisbane may have a letdown after pouring it all out last week in the game I attended. And I know it was a huge emotional rise for the Warriors as well, but New Zealand have it all to play for in front of them. And of course, we understand how important top 2 is to New Zealand when you watch how that team goes to another level in front of the home faithful. And then you've got to have a bit of faith if you're going to take my final best bet, which will be Titans. And I'm going first half against the Knights, plus 6.5 at $1.80 on Ladbrokes and Neds. It's just about line value, I'd say. As good as Newcastle have been for many weeks, and Titans very inconsistent and off a couple of really poor turnouts, that I'm looking for a little bit of a response. I don't think the Gold Coast have given up completely for the year. I know that there's some big ins for Newcastle, but they're still not a full complement. I do think, once again, that losing some really big star players 2 or 3 weeks ago catches up with Newcastle at some point. And it doesn't even have to be this week, but just first 40, I want to see the Titans have a crack, and I'll take that full 6.5. As I check the comments, and I wasn't fishing for some Finns comments, but I appreciate a few people saying Finns for sure. To me, if the Finns couldn't win it, I'd be stoked to see New Zealand win. I think they deserve it. I think they have the best fan base in the NRL, and I think the scenes would just be incredible. Looking at the atmosphere and the crowds over in New Zealand, whether they remain at Mount Smart or they were to take it to Eden Park for an even bigger game like a prelim and pack even more fans in, I think they've got the team to do it, and it's the year to do it, being like a wide open competition. And I was saying this months ago, that it's not a foregone conclusion that Penrith's just going to dog walk everybody and cruise to victory. It's such a tough comp, and if there's going to be injuries at some point, more likely than not, that everyone's going to sustain. And now you get one of your most important players in doubt, because, of course, we'll talk more about it. But Yo avoiding surgery, so he could still play a part and still lift another premiership trophy. But it's borderline, and it could be, we might not see Isaiah until prelim time. So those 5 best bets I'll repeat again later throughout the show. So even some people saying Chooks, but a few comments saying they'd go for the Warriors. So Warriors and Finns seem to be the most popular side. So I appreciate it. If anyone wants a second team and you want to join the Finns bandwagon, all aboard. My best bets are thanks to BetBank, and I did talk about last week how it's more than NRL. Check out their in-house predictions model for AFL player disposals, which you can play as singles or in same gamers. That's hitting at a similar rate to best bets. Actually, best bets dropped off a couple % on the weekend. That hurt. But 60% winners on over 200 picks on 2A markets. You can find that under the tools on BetBank if you're a gold subscriber, which you get for free for 7 days, which essentially gives you 2 weekends if you join midweek with the code TryPod and you get 50% off for 2 months afterwards thanks to that code as well. So let's talk round 23, Indigenous round. As I said before, there's just so much to discuss, and I appreciate you throwing your thoughts in as well. So I'm going to try and go fast because I feel like we've got that many notes, and we're going to chew up a chunk of time anyway. But we started on a bad note. Cowboys beat the Titans 30-8 at Seabus. So the best bet being 4.5, crunched into 2.5 counts for nothing. I did say that game could go either way for the Cows. Either their season's not over. Like, I wasn't writing North Queensland off, and they still had time to sort of restabilize and dust themselves off after that obliteration at home. But I just thought more so line value was with the Titans, and we had that possibility that the Cows were done. Well, clearly North Queensland was not done, and it was easy to say after the fact that when you get a team that's off a humiliating defeat, you just don't want to go against that side the next week. Brimo playing 6 over Ilias in the end didn't work. We've seen that one before for Titans fans, but a solid win for North Queensland, restoring that top 8 position. And yes, while Nane was missed, I mean, what a weapon someone like Helam Lukey is to deploy. This next one, Warriors 28 beat the Panthers 12. That score doesn't tell you the whole story, but I'll say this. When you're watching the Warriors do the haka, because again, Indigenous round allowed them to do that, or they got the idea to do it, and obviously it was very appropriate and the first time they've ever done it, the New Zealand Warriors. When you're watching them do the haka, did you ever doubt that the Wars were going to get up and win this one? Just other pre-game notes. Cogger had the birth of a child. He didn't play. You would have thought Talangi would get an opportunity to go back into 6. In fact, Cole was favoured in the halves, which really shows how out of favour Blaze is at this point. And then Tamari Martin was ruled out a couple of days before kickoff, opening the door for Metcalf to start at 7, where he starred. And New Zealand dominated this, 18-0 at halftime, 22-0 was the biggest lead. Alamotti in the bin first half for a dangerous lift. Hurt the Panthers for sure, and New Zealand did capitalise when Alamotti was on the in the sin bin as well. I will say, as much as the Warriors bludgeoned Penrith, the Panthers made a comeback with 20 to go. New Zealand was nervous, not only cutting the lead from 20 to 22-12, but actually scoring another try, which would have cut it to 4 before the bunker overturned it for being offside. My other notes, Lecker getting another start at centre, and I saw the stat that he had the most ever line breaks by Warriors centre, 11, or no, can't have been line breaks. Sorry, I must have my note incorrect. Must be tackle breaks, but 11 tackle breaks. And the other 2 players in Warriors history that have had 11, Connie Hurrell and Solomon Akata. And if you're a long-time follower of the pod, they're 2 of my favourite players ever. And Lecker is on that list as well for me. And this game makes the premiership race closer than it's ever been. The Roosters game we'll get to next, but the Roosters have actually pulled equal top with Penrith. Penrith still the superior points differential. And then Warriors have a better plus-minus than Roosters, 1 win behind. And, of course, first plays second this week, so they can't both win, meaning New Zealand being 1 win back, they'll catch up to somebody should they win on the weekend. In addition to that, like Vay Munga is in the team this week. He didn't even play that game. Jackson Ford, don't forget about Jackson Ford, who was in the Origin discussion, is coming back for the finals, right? And I guess the question for New Zealand becomes, what do you do when Tamari Martin's available again? And I suppose the fact that Tamari is out for another 3 or so weeks means you can just wait and see like how well Metcalf plays. But if Metcalf keeps producing what he did on Friday, I think there's a higher ceiling to New Zealand with Metcalf in the side, and that's what could be required to get you over the top and win the comp. Of course, you'd probably carry whoever you didn't pick on the bench, like if it was a Tamari Martin in your 19, but you've also got a Sam Healy who comes on. So it's hard. You can't really bring on a bench half and a bench hooker every game, but it definitely helps to have depth because don't forget that Tanner Boyd was one of New Zealand's best in the first 8 to 10 weeks of the year, and he's got a devastating ACL injury. So when you look at it that way, what an embarrassment of riches Webster has at his disposal. But it's also a credit to Webster and the system he's set up and how well the forwards get on a roll that so many different halves can prosper. As for Penrith, let's say we see Yo again in a prelim. So void surgery. He does his rehab. is maybe questionable in a month, but you might try and hold him back and just try and get to that prelim. Then there's a risk of a re-injury. You got a World Cup at stake, but obviously there's a comp to be won. So Yo comes back in, but what I'm saying is he's not going to be 100%. Penrith still deserves to be favourites. I said on the weekend, I'd wind Penrith out to 350, and I think they are about the 320 range. And when you consider Yo might still come back in, you got Henry. Who I've seen. I wrote this note before I saw the lineups, but my logical move would be Henry to prop and Lindsay Smith to lock, and that's what's has transpired with the team list. But don't forget Mitch Kenny is also back in the finals. He can play a lock role as well. And, this is separate to the forward pack, but McLean is out currently. That's another reason I went against Penrith last week. It doesn't mean I don't think Penrith can win. Far from it. I think you're crazy if you rule writing Penrith off at this point, but it definitely brings them closer to the pack. So then next one that is still on the screen was Roosters 20 beating the Bulldogs 18. So this was a massive missed opportunity in terms of the betting tips for me, because line was 9.5 and I had a strong lean to the Dogs. And I've liked the Dogs and seen the value in them, especially in the second half of the year when they've been written off by a lot of sides. And I still think that it's a very capable footy team in Canterbury. But knowing that Teddy had been spotted in a moon boot at training and would be in doubt, you could only justify that line was 9.5 if Teddy was playing. So it was a free roll to take the 9.5 with Canterbury. I failed you by not doing so. When Teddy got scratched, I knew the line would come into at least 6. It actually closed 4.5, and you still would have won with Canterbury, who were down 8-2, and that was 2 tries, both not converted by Walker. But then from down 8-2 at halftime, the Dogs were up 18-8 with 15 to play. And part of the reason the Dogs were able to get on top was the Roosters were very sloppy. Maybe that Cowboys game was just too easy for them. I mean, if you cast your mind back to the Cowboys game, at one point the Roosters just scored a try untouched, one pass off a scrum. And then in this game, the Roosters not once but twice dropped the ball one pass off a scrum when you're just about to start an attacking set. But it didn't end up costing the Roosters. They got 2 tries in the space of about 2 minutes late in the game, swinging yet another Chooks comeback. Billy Smith had a double. That's actually 7 wins in a row for the Roosters, and nobody has won 8 in a row in this competition, which would be 2 full months undefeated, and playing Penrith this week. But I'm backing the Roosters with a best bet, and while I don't need the Chooks to win, I think they will, and I think they will get to 8 in a row, and I've said this several times that this team just keeps improving and are true contenders. And while that was an ugly win, I definitely don't take anything away from the Roosters. If you can play subpar and still win, that's a mark of a good team. And I also think don't dismiss the opponent, the Bulldogs. I will also give credit to the Dogs and say Canterbury played really well and proved they could mix it with a contender. But that doesn't count for a great deal because the actual 2 competition points would have gone a long way, given that the Dogs are now on the outside looking in. Huge match, of course, incoming this weekend for the Bulldogs. But losing Tupanua after he just returned from that hamstring injury, of course, hurts as well. Next one, Storm Seagulls over at HBF Park. It was 42-20 to Melbourne. I'll slide my graphic so you can see the game I'm talking about. And I've got to be honest, I leaned Manly. I definitely said great bet getting on Manly early at plus 4.5. I'm not saying that to rub in salt into the wound to Undertaker because that ends up going down, which is how often does that happen when you get a great look ahead line, then the team no-shows. To be completely truthful, the line went all the way to Manly a 4.5 point favourite from 4.5 point dogs. But then when the team list came out a week ago and Munster was in, not only does that make Melbourne better, but it showed like an intent to still go out and perform and not just sort of write off the rest of the year. So then I actually put Melbourne as a best bet at plus 4.5 because even after team list came out, you could still get it at a couple of bookies. But what I realized is they were just slow moving. And by the time the pod went live, which we go live an hour after team list, every bookie had corrected into 1.5. And I didn't like Melbourne at 1.5. In fact, it was still a lean to Manly. So when Manly was up 14-0, I was cursing, going, oh, of course, Manly's season's on the line, off a bye, Melbourne are done. And I was watching it with Alexi, if you're a long-time follower of the pod, and I was saying to Alexi, always the way, lean Manly, didn't play it. And then next thing we watched, the Storm score 40 straight points. I mean, the try just before halftime for Melbourne, cutting it to 14-12 was huge. All the running with Melbourne's second half, Farlongo, Keeley, Leo, Meany kicking 9 goals in his future home, HBF Park. But awful by Manly. To give up 42 straight when the season's on the line. I had a good, let's call it a robust discussion with Undertaker. For you guys to be a fly on the wall, we had a good argument over Messenger, and he knows I still love him, about like how good are Manly really, you know, and he's blaming injuries above all. But I'm saying, well, you know, if you thought that the team was injury decimated, you wouldn't have bet on them against Melbourne. And Melbourne's got just as many injuries, and it was a better spot for Manly. But Matty was sort of saying, oh, that game's an anomaly. And I'm like, well, what about getting 40 put on you by the Titans? Going down to the Cowboys is a big favourite. Who else they go down to? Penrith getting, 50 put on you by the Sharks? And he was saying, oh, well, we've had like way more injuries and stuff. But part of it is, let's agree that Manly's not a deep team. And that was part of my argument against Manly at the start of the year. And I have to admit, like slightly baffled about how Foz was getting as much as he was getting out of Manly during that crazy winning run, because he was working miracles in my eyes. And I'm not going to call it luck, because on the other hand, if you see a team play really well for an extended period of time, like Manly did, to give them credit, then the ability's got to be in there. But it just seemed like obviously Fozball wasn't sustainable. It's almost a curse. If you got touted Fozball or Benji ball mid-year this season, everything went off the rails soon after that. But this was also a reminder to us that Melbourne is a proud club and still staunch, and Hayden Watson is a real one. This game, you're going to have to forgive me. I got plenty of notes. Dolphins 40 beat the Broncos 32 at Suncorp. What an epic battle. So it's 24-0 to the Broncos. And I did say to those sitting around me, well, I've seen the Dolphins come back from 24 down at this ground before. And on that occasion, I got to sit next to the biggest Titans fan there is in Clarkey. And I sat next to the biggest Broncos fan known to man in Barney for this one. And I really got to enjoy this game. And the Finns pull it back to 30-24 by halftime. But I mean, at 24-0, it just seemed like it's obviously not the Finns' night. The Dolphins had already botched 2 early tries. Like, you get a clean line break, a draw and pass, but Walsh knocks it down. Cobbo, good opportunity to score. Wingers always score those, especially the form Cobbo's been in, but no, his foot hit the sideline, and everything Brisbane touched turned to gold. Not to mention, Brisbane just looked like a team that was up for it. And I said this a week ago, this was Brisbane's grand final, and Brisbane had so much more energy. Speaking of a grand final, Mam had a hat-trick in again. You know how that game ended as well. So I was sort of sitting there going, oh, why does this always happen to me when I come to a live game? Because I was recalling going to watch the Finns play the Roosters last year, and we got about 60 on us that day. But of course, whoever had the ball had a chance. So I wasn't writing the Finns off. But when it was 24-0, Brisbane was on the attack. If they could have easily got to 30-0, and that was where the Broncos dropped the ball. And of course, Hammer has the scoop and score. That turned the tide, and then it became a case of nobody being able to defend errors. So Brisbane makes an error, Finns score again. Brisbane makes another error, Finns are suddenly it's 24-18. And one of the Brisbane errors was like throwing an intercept on their own 20 and then couldn't defend that. But then the Broncos kick off and the Finns drop it, and then the Finns can't defend that error. Then it's 30-18, and then another turnover by Brisbane, and the Dolphins get that chance to score right at the end. And it's a loose ball. It's a ball behind Cobbo. He flicks back into play to Herbie, and no one gets a hand on him. Like, that was just an embarrassing defense by the Broncos. And Herbie's a guy that can do special things out there, so we'll take it. But I've never felt so good about being down 6 at halftime. The other point you probably got to make is that the game changed in terms of intensity, especially defensively, when Plath and Donahue entered the fold. And that says a lot about what an awesome squad the Finns do have this year and the caliber that is on the bench. The second half, I'd say it calmed down a bit, but it was the Dolphins who got the final 3 tries of the match, hitting the front. Katoa's 4th assist got them in front, and his 5th assist, which was the kick marked by the hammer, sealed the deal. Over 50,000 fans, vast majority Finns fans. I thought it'd be a split crowd because, of course, Brisbane gets a lot of supporters. But in fact, it was Brisbane's biggest ever collapse with a 24-point lead blown and a 7th straight home loss. I think Brisbane will get up for 1 or 2, maybe to send Reno out. Look, this is what I'll say to Broncos fans as well. At the end of the day, you are still the champions. You can still enjoy being the premiers for 2 more months, you know? And as bad as this year has gone, and they're down to, 15th or 16th, any club would take that, win the comp 1 year and come second last the next year. I dead set, if you offered that to Penrith, they will take winning the comp this year, even if you told them they're 16th next year. And you might say that's crazy. Penrith's so good. They can win the comp both years. But you'll take winning the comp 1 out of 2 years, no matter how bad the second one is. You got to sell your soul to the devil. That's how hard it is to win a comp. And that still counts for something. As much as this looks like a team that's tired and Madge has burnt them out, who am I to question Madge? Because his training methods is what got him to be the fittest team in the comp, to go on that majestic run in last September and October, right? So that still counts for a lot, but it's been a bit of a horror year. But again, I loved that game on Saturday night. Shout out Alexi, pod legend, of course, that many of you know. And he now works for the bookies, of course, and was up to his old tricks. He bet Barney live when the Finns were down 32-30. But I love the point Barney made as well, though he was devastated. He said to me, it was a good sign looking at the Finns on the field right after full time that they didn't make a big deal out of winning. It really didn't look like the Finns were overly celebrating, and they're just sort of getting on with business. Unlike, let's say, when the Cowboys got that win over the Finns, over the Broncos. So I agree with that too, that yes, the Dolphins have booked their maiden finals berth, but we've got a bigger fish to fry. Then I caught the train home. Well, caught the train where I was staying in Brisbane, and I did see the score of Rabbitohs Eels. I was planning to watch this one later on delay, and we had a best bet of Bunnies -7.5. And I mentioned your closing line value, you get through the 8, through the 10. And I saw on someone else's phone who was watching the game, it was 28-0 to Souths. And so in my mind, I chalked it up. Yep, another win there, you know. First half hat-trick to Alex Johnston. But then the Eels actually staged this massive comeback. It's 24-0 para in the second half. Nearly the biggest comeback in NRL history, if not for that Cody Walker 40-20 late. So we actually don't cover. Souths nearly blow it completely. I told you Sam Rani reminds me of Lomax. You would have seen he had some similar moments to Lomax, good and bad. There was injuries for both sides with Ashton Ward doing his hamstring, but also Ayongi for the Eels has hurt his knee. And, well, what else can you say? Classic game of two halves. But most importantly, a crucial 2 points for the Bunny that keeps the Bunnies keep the upper hand over the Dogs. They, of course, clash this week. But it means that the Bunnies have some wiggle room. Keeping them, that win kept them 1.5 wins ahead of the Dogs, you could say, which could make all the difference when we come down to the end of this finals race. Then on Sunday, 2 more to cover. So this one hurt as well, but I'll take my hat off to the Knights, to be fair. They beat the Raiders. Newcastle did 30-24. My best bet was Raiders at Pick'em. Now we get Crossland and Bradman Best ruled out before kickoff. So while I said we got good closing line value on all 4 plays, I'm not going to claim an awesome market read for the best bet. That line moved based on those injuries. But I will say, once I heard Best and Crossland were out as well, I was so confident about our play. I thought that was one of these really strong plays. Not so much when the Knights were up 12-0, but then the Raiders got themselves into the game, leveled up, in fact, even got on top. And I felt like the Raiders will go on with it and win this one. Of course, there's some controversy late with the bunker overturning what would have been a Raiders penalty into a sin bin and penalty against Horsburgh when he slapped Gagai. And the Knights go on and score the sealer. I think it was Dom Young's birthday, and he got that try. Frizzell, 300th game, though he was hobbling, I noticed, but the team definitely lifted for him. How about this stat? The Knights' worst result since round 9 is a 2-point loss. So every game since round 9, where I think they were handily beaten by Penrith, has either been a win or right down to the wire. Now, I said they'd miss Lucas. I said they'd miss Brown, but Sanders Smith played so well. I said they'd miss Lucas. But now you've unearthed Francis Manu Leleua. So it's like, in addition to McEwen there, so the Knights are still playing outstanding, and credit to them. Of course, I already sort of joked a little bit about Ricky's post-game explosion, really throwing Horsburgh under the bus. And that's probably the last we see of him in a green jersey, Corey. Hearing maybe he's Perth-bound now. And look, there was a lot of frustration there. That's the Raiders season over. That was a brain snap. And that was pretty brutal because I feel like, throwing Big Rat under the bus like that. But let me know if you think that's justified. But more insightful to bettors, that was the headline. But what I was more interested in was what Ricky said afterwards, which he straight away said, look, Sasangi's been playing busted. I'll rest him this week, but then I'll bring him back for Papali's last game. Like, Sasangi needs shoulder surgery. But Ricky's already saying that that's going to be an important game, So that's something for us to sort of put in the memory bank. And Ricky also said, there's a few young guys in New South Wales Cup I want to have a look at, but I don't want to ruin their, semi-finals push either. So it depends on their results. So you've got to be wary that at some point the Raiders could make mass changes, but it sort of depends. And I didn't have time to really crunch the numbers on what the New South Wales Cup needs or like how that's going to play out. But I will look a little closer in coming weeks. Actually, there have not been mass changes for the Raiders this week, but that's something we should keep an eye on. And it's another way of saying the white flag will be waved at some point by Canberra this year. And you have the minor premiers missing the finals. Who could have predicted that? That was something I did tell you guys back in, I suppose, all the way back in February. As Siebes says, Horsburgh going to the Broncos. He'd be too young to be joining the Broncos, wouldn't he? I think I did hear that rumor as well. So potentially, I heard the Perth rumor. That made more sense to me. Like, how many new players do Brisbane need? They're already getting Barnett. I suppose, of course, they are losing Haas. And who else has gone up there? Gagai as well. But Horsburgh, a guy that's played Origin, right? So at his best, could do a job for any first-grade team, especially off a bench. And if he can sort of get the brain explosions out of his game, can be a damaging player. Now, some damage was done to the Sharks' top 2 and top 4 hopes and their winning streak, with Siebes' Dragons dealing them a 24-16 defeat at Jubilee. It was an ugly game, and it's funny that the Dragons were the biggest underdogs of the week and pulled out the outright upset. That's, $6 or 15.5 points they were in the handicap. The Sharks had won 5 in a row going in, so now top 2 is probably out of reach, but now the Sharks have got to worry again about securing top 4. Hamish Stewart had a whale of a game. He's a future superstar for sure for the Blues, and I wonder about the Kangaroos, at least train-on squad for this World Cup. Sedu too scored the stunner. He's a great story. One off the scrum to seal it late. A great solo try. As good as the Sharks were going, I did sort of talk about you just can't be up every week. And I think I mentioned this multiple Dragons games. Like, the Dragons are that natural team you might have a letdown against because they are last. However, being a derby game, Cronulla shouldn't have got ambushed here. And clearly St. George lacked no motivation. They played with great desperation because the stats said that Cronulla had the tackles in the opponent 20, something like 40-20, like, or 36-16, like significantly, more than double the opportunities in the opponent 20. And you've got to be staunch defensively to repel a side as classy as the Sharks, which St. George did. And as Dan Lever mentions, the Knights are $11 for top 4. It's unlikely. And those tight losses, those 3 tight ones in a row, are probably going to cost you top 4. I'm sorry to say, Lever, but the Sharks loss opens the top 4 for somebody else. I'm going to tell you it's the Finns, who actually have the same win-loss record as the Sharks. The problem for the Finns is that Cronulla's plus-minus is 70 points better than the Dolphins. And, of course, that was swung by 130 points in one game because we let them come up and beat us 66-0 at KO. So I'll be quite salty if that ends up being the difference between top four or not, because you tell me, when you're looking at who can win the comp, there's basically 5 teams around 11 or $10 or shorter. And the obvious ones is Penrith, New Zealand, and the Roosters. But then on the fringe are the Sharks and the Dolphins. And if either of them can get in the top 4, then people aren't considering the Sharkies or Finns in the same echelon or as high caliber, let's say, as the 3 biggest favourites of the comp. But anything can happen in week 1 finals, and suddenly you could have a Cronulla or a Dolphins hosting a prelim. But I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. But that's just what you can dare to dream if you can get into the top 4, and that is still up for grabs thanks to that surprising result. And Debauch Pepe says, could the Finns win the comp after conceding 50 plus twice? And that's it. That's another stat that at some point somebody can defy history. And the Dolphins, at $11 to win the comp, I mean, you tell me, I certainly wouldn't be riding off the Finns. I've said all year that I've got that belief. And look, I'll tell you, when we get to the Dolphins who play Manly, when we get to that game, how I really have to keep my belief in check and have self-awareness about potentially being overconfident. But yes, it is possible that a team could concede 50 plus and win the comp this year, because I do think the Dolphins have that type of ceiling. But let's talk round 24 Thursday night about 2 other sides that there's no question on the ceiling or capability of these 2. It's Roosters against Panthers. I should say Panthers-Roosters, because Penrith are the hosts at CommBank, and Penrith are the 1.5 point favourites. All lines thanks to Unibet. 2 teams, top of the table, only separated by plus minus. Now, does anyone in the comments know how short Penrith got for the minor premiership? I feel like I saw $20s or shorter earlier in the year. You'd be sweating at this point. I had heard Edwards would be back for Penrith. Now, you're going to see the team list there that Edgar is still at 1, but Edwards is in the reserve, so that may still be the case. And as I said before, Lindsay Smith's at lock, Henry starts at prop, and Cogger is back in at 6. The Roosters have also been without a marquee fullback, but Teddy is named this week at 1. The stat that has started doing the rounds, and you'll hear plenty of times this week, is that the Roosters are 1-13 against Penrith in the 2020s. Now, they did have a similarly poor record against the Storm, which didn't hold them back from winning a few weeks ago. But Melbourne in 2026 is not the same team, whereas Penrith have looked as good as ever this year, right? And Penrith, in fact, destroyed the boys from Bondi. It was something like 44-4 in the first month of this year. But I do like the Roosters on Thursday night. And I thought the game against the Dogs could be a bit of a look-ahead spot because Penrith's had this game circled. Sorry, the Roosters have had Penrith circled for quite a while now, I think. As much as the Chooks will play it down, they've known this game was incoming. Whereas you can't say the same for Penrith because they had to have full attention on New Zealand, and that they've just had to obviously do that overseas travel and play an absolute bruiser. And while, look, I'm not playing the Roosters with the half-try handicap because I think Edwards is out. If Edwards is out, that's an absolute bonus. And I would say if Edwards is not 100% and you're Penrith, you don't need to play Edwards. You can still sort of control your top 2 destiny without winning this game. Do you need to win another prelim, or do you need to go all out? Sorry, not a prelim, a minor prem. Do you need to go all out to secure a minor prem? Like, there's a little bit more luxury there, I'd say, with Penrith, that all they're thinking about is September, October, whereas the Roosters have almost got something to prove that they're actually capable of mixing it with this team. And then there's simply the fact that Yo is out. And you can say, what about injured player theory? And that's true. Everyone else could lift. And I forgot to make the point earlier that the other fact of it is that without Yo, you're just going to lean a little bit more on Nathan Cleary to make things happen in attack. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because, you know, my opinion, he's the greatest player to ever play, right? So that's certainly the case, but it still thins out your pack. And you look at the Roosters, and they've got origin players on their bench, the likes of a Watson and a Lindsay Collins. And then you look at the Penrith bench. It's not on your screen. I can't fit it all in. But you got Scott, Patea, Phillips in the 17. I don't blame you if you're not familiar with those names, right? But that's another reason why I think the wrong team is favored here. I'm picking the Roosters to win, and I've got the half try handicap for my best bet. So I would play the Unibet Rooster Booster. I don't think that market's created yet, but they always create a good value play in favor of the Roosters. So I definitely take a good look at that with your Uni account. Moving to Friday, Sea Eagles Dolphins. Finns are an 8.5 point favorite at 4 Pines. Faulolo is in at fullback, which moves Hopewadi to the wing. Paseka is injured. Burbo remains sidelined. Dolphins will be without Donahue for a couple of weeks, but Ray Stone is a good replacement. So straight off the bat, when the lines or when the team list came out, I wrote down Dolphins minus 7.5 as a best bet. This is a classic revenge spot for the Dolphins after the calamity at KO. Fosball was born that night, don't forget, when the Seagulls were a 10.5 point underdog and then led 52-0. Now, what happened since then, and this was about 4:15 my time, or maybe 4:30, was then the line started moving everywhere, and I think that line is now closer to 10.5, which obviously diminishes the value of my would-be best bet. And I also thought, hold your horses, Jacob. You can't just, of course, you're going to love the Dolphins against Manly. You've loved the Dolphins all year. I love them because they're my team, but I've also loved the value. And I've been highly skeptical of Manly all year. So, like, everybody could have predicted I was going to like the Dolphins over Manly in this game. So, because I have that self-awareness, and of course, my instinct is going to say the Finns are a bet, I've got to make sure I'm really confident if I actually play it. And so I'm trying to make the case against the Dolphins. And I could say, is there a potential letdown after the Battle of Brisbane? But then again, I would say that win against Brisbane makes the Finns feel really hopeful about being top 4 again, especially after the Sharks lost. And that's in favor of the visitors. And I bet now that I'm not playing the Dolphins, I'll put the cleanest through Manly. But I'm just happy to leave it alone now that the line has shifted. I think you can still find 8.5, right, which is not as good as 7.5. And I think it's moving to double digits. But I also think you've got to be careful to go against the team after their absolute low point. Maybe that was last week for Manly. They've had their manhood challenged by Foz at this point. It is back at home for Manly. And is it a bit of a free roll for foreign because everybody will be picking the Finns? Faulolo does make a difference. I think this could be a sort of an all-in spot for Manly just because foreign was so disappointed. Not so much with execution or skill, but with showing a hard edge or lack thereof. So I'm not picking an upset here. I'm just explaining why I've looked on and not made my Finns the best bet. So then we get 2026 finals, NRL finals kicking off early, potentially later on Friday night with Bulldogs, Rabbitohs. I would say this is game of the round, but of course we got Roosters, Panthers the night before. So we got 2 crackers Thursday and Friday night. So Bulldogs, Rabbitohs, Bulldogs are 3.5 point favorite. I mentioned Tupanua's out. The Bunnies will start with Sullivan at 7 as Ward is sidelined. Graham is back on the wing for Bennett as well. Now, to be clear, when I say the final starts early, I'm insinuating that the winner is in and the loser is out. That's not completely true because there's still 3 or 4 games to go, right? What's more accurate to say would be this is do or die for the Bulldogs. If the Bulldogs win, they'll pull within points differential of Souths. If the Bulldogs lose, they would be 2.5 wins behind the Bunnies with only 3 games to play. So Souths can lose this and still make the finals. Now, what if the Dogs lose and then still catch North Queensland? That's possible as well, but the Cowboys have this really kind draw. I don't think the Cows are going to drop too many more. I've got the Cows as the best bet this weekend. So the most likely outcome in my eyes is only one of these 2 is going to make the finals, and it will be the winner. And given the recent resurgence of the Dogs and Bunnies as well, Bunnies haven't been super impressive, but let's say the capability of the Bunnies, and there was footage this week that Trell Mitt spotted at training, so might not be out for the year. That makes this that much more of a mammoth game. This is not, let's see who gets to come in and make up the numbers. Whoever gets into the finals out of Dogs or Bunnies, like that's a team that can take a scalp or 2 if it all comes together in September. I have a hard time picking this match on its own because I'm a fan of both sides and their ability this year. You know, when it comes to the Dogs, that I do rate them higher than most, and I see like a lot of quality in the outside backs with Kiraz and Burton since he's moved there. The spine, of course. Galvin's a good player, but I meant to say Critter in there at 5'8". He's just a superstar and can't do much wrong no matter where he plays. The forward pack is quality, especially with those second rowers back on deck and the bench as well. But you can sort of give those similar compliments to the Bunnies. And I think because the Bunnies potentially had their sights set a week ahead last week, I think 28-0, the Bunnies almost switched off against Para, which cost us dearly. But I think it's because the Bunnies knew what a huge game they had coming up this week. So I agree with the market. Canterbury should be a slight favourite. They are the home team with the home members there, a higher defensive ceiling. But I won't write Bennett's ability to get the best of his team. I won't write off his ability to get the best out of his team for a big occasion. Since I'm not backing the Dogs, I hope they lose, to be truthful. They caused me too much anguish the first half of this year. But I do hope they come ninth for the 9 lives bet. Undertaker says, came in late, didn't have to hear Manly analysis. Shout out. We will hear from the Undertaker later. He's got a play on the ugliest game of the weekend. Saturday now we move to. Saturday afternoon. It's Sharks Raiders. We've touched on this one because we do have a best bet, which is -8.5 with Cronulla. That's the alt line on 365. Also available on Better. And that's despite the fact that Adam Fanua-Blake is suspended. I should say as well, Unibet line is at 10.5. It's at Shark Park. Iro is in to replace the injured Ramian. Talakai also bolsters the Sharks bench. Sasangi rested as Ricky suggested. And Horsburgh, can't figure that one out. Horsburgh not in the lineup. Tamale in at centre. It's not wholesale changes for the Raiders. So don't write the Raiders off. But this spot is screaming at me, take the Sharks. I've done so. Because you got to figure that the Sharks probably come into this game on Saturday outside the top 4. That's if the Finns have won. But if the Finns have lost, then the Cronulla is saying, all right, now we can cement top 4 with a Finn slip-up. So either way, it's so important for Cronulla. They're at home, good team off a bad loss where Cronulla looked complacent. And you got the fact that Raiders have to be shattered. And then it got me thinking, the Raiders played Cronulla in a game after being shattered, and that was week 2 of the finals last year, where the Raiders couldn't pick themselves up off the canvas after that brutal week 1 finals loss. Now, I know this is a little bit different, but it was a season-ending loss last week for the Raiders, so it's not all that different. And on paper, the team you can see there before you for the Green Machine is still reasonably strong, but it's in terms of energy, I can't see it. And you know what else I'll say? If Canberra's attitude is off at all, I think a big hiding could be on the cards, and I'd be having some smaller stakes at wider margins. I'd be looking at Sharks 30 plus, 40 plus, so beating the spread by 20 or 30 for some really good value. Because if Canberra are a little bit off their game, Cronulla's the type of team that could absolutely put you to the sword. Then later Saturday night, and again, we do have a best bet on this one. It's Eels-Cowboys. Cowboys are 5.5 point favourite. The best bet is -4.5. Walker's on the bench for the Eels. Russell also available, returning from injury. And you got Perth-bound Twiddle, the Twiddle wave, who had that sensational introduction to first grade a few months ago, taking Iongi's place at 1. The Cowboys see Reed Marnie return at 9. I say it nearly every week, but I say it because I'm right. Para are a pesky team, and nothing more pesky than being 28-0 down and dead and buried and coming back just far enough to cover the 7.5. But another great example of Parramatta being pesky was the game they pinched in North Queensland, where the Cowboys were, I want to say the Cowboys were up 10 late, and then Para actually forced extra time and ended up winning it. And I'm sure North Queensland remember that game even more clearly than I do. Plus, this is such an important game for finals implications. Whoever loses Bulldogs Bunnies, let's put it this way, the loser on Friday night will be buying tickets to this to go and cheer for Parramatta to keep the door open. I've frequently talked about how the Cowboys have got this kind draw to end the year. It's only a good draw if you go out and beat these teams you're supposed to beat. So no interest in touching the Eels this week. And the fact that they played well last week doesn't make me more impressed. If anything, they fell short. And I just think Para is not going to have a huge effort each and every round. Para are not the same team without Ayongi. Clear motivation for the Cowboys. Under a converted try, I had to do it with the best bet. As I did with the next game, Broncos-Warriors, although the line is just over a converted try at 7.5. At Suncorp, which, as I said before, is a home game for New Zealand, basically, at this point, if you've ever been to Suncorp when New Zealand are playing. And that's often when Brisbane's still competitive and alive for the year. So it's a different story this week. And Reynolds is still out. Duffy remains at 7. Metcalf, of course, is named at halfback because I mentioned Tamari Martin out around a month. Vaimunga back to bolster or boost the Warriors bench even further. And I think I already told you all the stats last week about what's the motivation for Brisbane. Well, just the fact they haven't won at home for so long. 7 losses in a row at home. Haven't won there since like April. And of course, Brisbane's still got some really good players and a gun team. Of course they have. It's the bones of the side that won the comp last year. But you don't want to touch Brisbane this week, I don't think, after they poured it all out. Did I mention the fact that Brisbane was a 7.5-point favourite against the Dolphins? And of course, the Dolphins scored again late with Hammer. That actually meant the Dolphins won by 8. I mean, can you imagine? I didn't have it as the best bet, but it was a lean Brisbane. But I was just wholeheartedly cheering the Finns. But can you imagine having plus 7.5 with Brisbane? And you're up 24-0 and you don't cover 7.5. I'm sure there's some people watching this who were in that position. So pour one out for those guys. That would have been sickening. Obviously, I was on the other side of it. I'm really enjoying it. But same line again this week. And look, it was a huge game for New Zealand last week. So is there a letdown after really getting up for Indigenous round against Penrith? I think that's fair. But I think the difference is the Warriors could just be riding a huge momentum wave and everyone's just bouncing around training and they know that they can give the comp a massive shake this year. Whereas how does Brisbane lift themselves up again this week? Yes, some pride and playing at home, but that only gets you so far. And as I said before, how much home advantage is there really for Brisbane? Because I think the Warriors will be energized by how much support get out to support Waz Nation. And on top of that, with the top 2 spot up for grabs, depending on who wins out of Roosters and Panthers, it doesn't really matter. The Warriors might not be able to get back into the top 2 winning this, but they'll be right there either way because one of those 2 above them will lose. And you understand why finishing top 2 would be so important. Of course, top 4 is the double chance and the opportunity for the bye and the home prelim, but you want that game in the week 1 of the finals to be at home as well, which it doesn't mean as much to like a Roosters or a Sharks, depending on if they don't have to leave Sydney anyway, but it means the world to New Zealand, right? So I'm picking the Warriors to do a dominant double over Brisbane because we saw it already during Magic Round. I don't know if the Broncos can dust themselves off this week. I'm not making Brisbane a total write-off for the rest of the year. As I said before, maybe when Reynolds is back, they can all circle the wagons and say, let's try and send him out. But for this weekend, I think minus 6.5 about the Waz is light on. On Sunday, we've got Knights Titans, and the Knights are a 12.5 to 13.5 point favourite with Best and Crossland back on deck. Ilias is in at 7 this time with Brimo back to the centres. It's the Holbrook revenge game, I suppose. And I have played the Titans plus 6.5 first half. Like, there is a risk here, of course, with the Knights being at home, playing outstanding and getting big guns back as well. But I'm sticking to my guns in saying that I do think Newcastle are overachieving, and I don't think it's sustainable every week. And I don't think the Knights are just going to roll everybody every week. But I tell you what, with a bye the week before finals, it gives Newcastle a great opportunity in that week 1 eliminator. And as Dan the Man said before, the Knights have not lost total hope of finishing top 4 themselves, though they'd need a couple of results to fall their way. I'm also looking for my money where I lost it, as the great man Russ once said, because I'm going to play the Titans in back-to-back weeks. And I think I've got a decent spot for the Titans because they're on a long turnaround off 2 terrible performances. And what I really need is just for the Titans to show a bit of fight in the first half, playing plus 6.5. I see the Gold Coast Titans as a team similar to Para. They're not a team you're going to tip many times to win each week, but there's just enough spark. It's not like all is lost because the coach is new and the coach still wants to finish the year strong and decide who in his team he really trusts. And that's why I think the Titans will still have a crack. Also, by not playing the second half, I'm avoiding the half where there's more fatigue. And when you've got Newcastle who have the best attack in the comp from inside their own half, when there's a lazy defender, I don't have to worry about that. And Ponga giving me nightmares in the second stanza. I would still lean Titans 13.5 for the full game, but my best bet, I am playing just the 6.5 first half line. Luke says, when you're up on 365 and you get the cash out 90%, you can take it as well. So that's something to consider. Or I've seen opportunities with the 365 cash out where the market has moved against the play and people could still cash out without any loss and then replay it even at a better line. Colt said he's not sure about his own Titans because they've been defensively woeful. It's one of those ones where, you know me, I read into the form, I watch every game, but sometimes when a team's been really bad, I'm looking for that side to respond and to make a correction, and also for the market to move against them, which I think it has moved a little bit too far with the magnitude of this line. Nate says he got Knights -5.5 first half, but both our bets are decent. It could land 6. That is the most likely number of any number for it to land. I would say that when a team is about a 5 or 6 point first half favorite, they're gonna win that half by exactly 6, probably 8% of the time, you know. So that could make both sides of it like a 54% winner at least. And then depending on the rest of your handicap, could be even stronger than that. So I'll be perfectly happy if that's the case. Nate, best of luck. All right, lastly, guys, we got Tigers, Dragons, and the Tigers are a slight 1.5 point favorite at CommBank. I'll bring it up on your screen. The Wests are off a bye. Makasini and Staffatoa make way. Toby Couchman joins the Dragons bench. It was his brother Ryan who had a whale of a game in the win over Cronulla. Cook was unused in that game, actually, but is named to start here. It's a tough one to pick, although I can't wait to hear how Undertaker sees it because it's sort of a low-stakes game. But then again, because it becomes winnable for Wests and St. George, and wins have been few and far between for these sides. As Zed says, Tigers won't win again this year, but they are $1.80 or so on Sunday. I considered overs, but then I thought about that Tigers-Eels game where I tried to play overs with the same logic, and then it was actually really gritty and ugly because both sides were so desperate to win, and that could happen again. And the Dragons are not really a side that are synonymous with shootouts, so I'm sure that probably, now that I've said that, it probably will end up about 28 all. But my best advice might be, apart from the diehards like Siebes in the comments, best advice might be spend some time with your family Sunday arvo and catch this one on replay. I'll lean Wests because I said I could not play Wests again this year until they showed me some fight, but they did demonstrate some effort in the Eels loss. But then to St. George's credit, they've been doing that most weeks as well. And St. George are another team in that boat that I just talked about, the Titans. You know who your coach is next year. He's in the building now. And I think if you're a St. George player, you want to stake your best claim that you can before these classy additions come in. Because obviously, Keon, Metcalf, Drinky, obviously they all command a starting spot, you know. So there's only so many other spots for everybody else in St. George. Definitely the type of team, dead last on the ladder, but a good team to bet on most weeks because they're getting a little bit overlooked by some opponents. They're still fighting hard, and they're not actually that terrible, the Dragons, if you watch them play. Everyone says, oh, they've got a good young forward pack. Well, it is true, and Toby Couchman is one of those good young forwards, and he's just been out. Lever says, how do you rate this season overall, especially this time of year in terms of level of footy? Like this time of year, you're looking for, has anybody given up? So Tigers maybe would be a candidate for that, but they did show fight last time we saw them. You're looking at the good teams are really starting to round into top form. And that means if they run into somebody who's not up for a game, then you can get some real blowouts, but you can also get to see some teams play at a really high level when they clash, like let's say Panthers Warriors last week. And of course, when the final spots are up for grabs, I love to see as many teams in the hunt as possible, because my favorite type of games is when it's close late and both sides are desperate to win. I really think that's where you see what everybody's made of. So I enjoy it, DL. If I don't know, if the Bunnies blast the Bulldogs this week and we already sort of know who our top 8 is, maybe the last couple of weeks of the season could have some low stakes games, which aren't my favorites. But for now, we've still got a heap of these games I can't wait to watch. I've come up with 5 best bets, so I'm really looking forward to it. Corey says, quality time with the family is watching this together. So you are definitely confirmed a sicko. Siebes, I love it. And Zed, why is Benji not under the blowtorch? Failed 3 years in a row, finishing bottom 4. I think that pressure is mounting at some point now on the Tigers, and I think I brought that point up last week as well. So I appreciate all of you who tuned in. That's not where the show ends, though, because Undertaker, as I told you before, has submitted a pick. It's on this game. I'm going to say he's going to be leaning Tigers, but let's have a listen.
G'day guys, play of the week. I'm going to go Warriors team total over 26.5 and $1.95 as well on TAB. Been a big month for Brisbane. They've been pretty plucky for a team out of contention. They've played 2 big derby games against the Dolphins and the Cowboys, big brother versus little brother kind of deals. They're always all up for them. And a big upset win over the Panthers a month back, but they were a big 3 stretch of games. A Knights home loss there in between, sandwiched in there as well, where they conceded 30 to them. This will be pretty much a Warriors home game. I don't know how many Broncos supporters other than the diehards are going to be turning up for it. Brisbane's full of New Zealanders. It will be a bit of a home game for them. We saw it in Magic Round. That was certainly the case. The Warriors racked up a score on them that time, and I think they're going to do it again. We only need 27, win, lose or draw. Yeah, Brisbane nothing to play for but pride at this point. Warriors still playing for the minor premiership, and they're in with a big chance of it. That'll be my go. Good luck.
So totally my mistake. As I say, I don't even get time to listen to the tips. And I somehow misread Maddie's message and thought that it was Tigers-Dragons game. But of course, he's actually with me on the Warriors. I've gone -6.5, and Maddie has gone Warriors team total over 26.5. So I apologize. I played that in the wrong position of the show. And but I think it makes sense to you. And that's just wouldn't be a live tripod without a mistake from me anyway, would it? Mixed matchup will be out tomorrow on Unibet. We've won at least 4 in a row, maybe 5 in a row. So on fire there. We did win on the weekend, even in a losing round. And I'll come up with another same gamer as I always do. And you can support the show before you dip out by just pressing like. It does all make a difference. But best of luck to everybody who follows along, especially if you're having a punt. Always do it responsibly. Set a deposit limit. And for free and confidential support, call the number in the show description or visit gamblinghelponline.org.au. I'll see you next Tuesday. Lego.